pollination. So from primary 4 we discussed the pollination, and this word the pollination comes from the word pollen, and the pollen when we join there we can get the word pollen grain, whereby we said pollen grains, they come from a part of a flower called the anther, and the anther with the filament they make of the part called the stamen, which we said to be the male part of a flower. Therefore, my dear learner, let us now understand, let us get to remind ourselves what pollination is. So therefore, pollination refers to the transfer of pollen grains from the anthers to the stigma. I repeat, pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the anthers to the stigma of a flower, as you are seeing here. So we are having this flower, and now we are having these things carrying pollen grains. So this one, it is an insect, and this insect is called a ladybird. So it is inside here in a flower, so it is getting something, then from there, from this flower comes to this flower, then from here, then to this flower. So it is now going to end up carrying pollen grains from the anthers of one flower, then to the stigma of another flower. That's what we call pollination. Therefore, pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the anthers of a flower to the stigma of a flower. Then let us now look at what we call types of pollination. I think now you still remember from your primary 4 we said we have two types of pollination. One is self-pollination and another one is cross-pollination. But again, before you go any further, I still tell you that at the end of the video we are going to have the activity. Please write it, answer it, and inbox for marking. And after doing the activity, you have also to write the notes. Then there will be a good learner. Now we are having two types of pollination. One, we have self-pollination and cross-pollination. Then let us look at what we call a self-pollination. Self-pollination, as you get the word self, so is the transfer of pollen grains, from the anthers to the stigma of the same flower. Is the transfer of pollen grains from the anthers to the stigma of the same flower. So pollination is that as pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the anthers to the stigma, then self-pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the anthers to the stigma of the same flower. So if this is our stigma, this one is the style, then this is the ovary, then we are having the male part made up of the filament stalk and the anther. Then this one produces the pollen grains, then they are going to be carried from the anthers to the stigma of the same flower. Now if this one is our flower, then with the flower stalk and so on. So the pollen grains are going to be carried from the anthers then to the stigma of the same flower, so from here to here of the same flower. Then the opposite is going to become cross-pollination. Then cross-pollination is the transfer of pollen grains. Get me right? Is the transfer of pollen grains. Cross-pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther, of one flower to the stigma of another flower. Is the transfer of pollen grains from the anthers of one flower to the stigma of another flower, but of the same kind. So these flowers, there are two different flowers, but the flowers are of the same species, they are of the same kind. For example, if you look at this diagram here, we are having the maize. This maize here, we are having the tassel. This tassel, it is the male part which is producing the pollen grains. Then down here we are having the silk. The silk is making the pistil, the female part of a flower. Then what you call cross-pollination, the pollen grains are going to move from the anther of this flower, then they land onto the stigma of another flower, but of the same kind. So they are of the same kind, they are all of the maize species, of the maize plant, so they are of the same type of plant, but they are different flowers. This one, it is a male part, this one is the female part, so they are coming from here, then they're landing here. So this one makes what we call cross-pollination. So some learners make mistakes when they're defining what cross-pollination is, but I'm repeating it for one more time. Is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower, but of the same kind. Whereas cross-pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the anthers to the stigma of the same flower. They don't go out, they are within the same flower. Okay, now I think that one has I've made it clear. Then let us move on and see what we call the pollination and the adaptation of flowers that undergo cross-pollination. Now when we look at this word adaptation, it means abilities. So abilities, the things that make these flowers to have what we call a self-pollination. Remember we said within self-pollination, the pollen grains, they just come from the anther of one flower, then they sit onto the stigma of the same flower. As if this one's our flower and this is the stigma, this is the anther, the filament stalk. So pollination will take place. The pollen grains are going to move from here, then they land onto this stigma. Then we are now looking at what we call the adaptations, the abilities, the things that put these flowers in position to just carry pollen grains from the anther then to the stigma within that same flower itself. Number one, we are going to look at this one. Some flowers, they have the pistil and the stamen growing at the same time. So the pistil and the stamen, remember we said pistil is the female part, the stamen is the male part, so mature at the same time. Mature at the same time, so they grow at the same time. So as the pistil is growing, even the stamen is growing, it grows, so they grow at the same time, meaning that they are at the same level. So that one is one adaptation. Adaptation number two, some flowers are hermaphrodites. What? They are hermaphrodites, meaning that they are bisexual, so they have both the pistil and the stamen inside them. So they have both the male and the female part inside them. Thus this one favors what we call self-pollination. Number three, some flowers remain buried under the ground. So some flowers remain buried under the ground, so they remain buried under the ground. So once they are buried under the ground, so they are not exposed to other agencies of pollination. Thus they have to have what we call a cross-pollination. Then adaptation number four, these flowers they have what we call, they remain closed, they remain closed. So these flowers remain closed until cross-pollination occurs. So they remain closed until cross-pollination takes place. So my dear learner, these are the abilities, these are the reasons as to why some flowers have a self-pollination. Then examples of these plants with self-pollination: one, we have beans. Those beans, you normally see those bean flowers, they undergo self-pollination, meaning that they are hermaphrodite, both male and female parts are inside, and they mature at the same time. Then another example, we are having what we call the simsim. Then we have also what we call the groundy nuts, together with what we call the tomatoes. So tomatoes, simsim, groundnuts, and beans, they have what we call self-pollination. Then after we have looked at the adaptations, the abilities, the things that make them have self-pollination, let us now look at their behavior when it comes to self-pollination. So let us look at the features, the characteristics of self-pollinated flowers. One, they don't produce scent. They do not produce scent. They don't produce scent. So this scent is a good smell which will help to attract pollinators. So they don't need pollinators to come and carry pollen grains from their anthers to the stigma. No, because they can do it by themselves. Then two, the stamen, the anther, we can take the anther and the stamen, or the anther and the stigma are at the same size. so they are the same size, so they are equal, they are the same size. Then number 3, they have dull colors, and number 4, they don't produce nectar. Remember we said nectar is the sweet juice produced by these flowers, so they don't produce nectar. Number 5, they produce a lot of light pollen grains. They produce a lot of light pollen grains. So then here I want you to get a difference between the characteristics and the adaptations. Adaptations, they are the abilities, then characteristics, how do they appear. Okay, now let us move on and look at what we call cross-pollination. These flowers do have the things that make these plants for them to have cross-pollination. Remember we said cross-pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the anthers of one flower to the stigma of another a flower, but of the same kind. And then let us, before looking at the adaptations and the characteristics, let us first cite out some examples. Now, what are you seeing here? We are having purples, meaning that these purple plants, the papaya, they have what we call cross-pollination. They not only these ones, but also the maize, that maize plant. So maize plants have cross-pollination. Then on top of that, we have what we call the coconut. So we also have what we call tomatoes, the passion fruits. These ones have self, then the passion fruits. So the passion fruits. So all these ones are the plants that have cross-pollination. Let us see the things that make them to have cross-pollination. Adaptation number 1, we are going to depend on this purple plant. So when you look at the purple plant or the purple plants, we have what we call the staminate plant and the pistillate plant. So we have staminate, a new word, and pistillate. Staminate, it means this plant, it has only the stamen, and pistillate, it has only the pistil, meaning that these flowers are unisexual, so they have only one reproductive organ, meaning that staminate has only the male part, the pistillate has only the female part. So that one calls for the crossing of pollen grains from the male plant to the female plant. Therefore the adaptation becomes, or let us write it here, it means that the pistil and the stamen grow on different plants. They grow on different plants. For example, the purples, the pistillate and the staminate, that is one. The number 2, let us take an example of a maize plant. We looked at this maize plant where we started from this lesson. Then we saw that this maize plant has the tassel, then the luyange, then the silk. So the tassel produces the pollen grains, then the silk receives them. The silk makes the female part, the tassel makes the male part. So they are on the same plant, but they are growing at different times, meaning that now the stamen and the pistil mature at different time. They mature at different time. The stamen and the pistil mature at different time. The best example is the maize. The number 3, there is what we call incompatibility. Wanji, it is incompatibility. This word incompatibility. So incompatibility comes from the word compatibility. So incompatibility of pollen grains. So what does this word mean? It means that failure of these pollen grains to germinate. For example, if you look at this flower, if it is bisexual, it has both the male and the female. If now the pollen grains come from the stigma, from the anthers here, then they sit on this stigma of this flower, then these pollen grains are not going to germinate into pollen tubes. Unless these pollen grains leave this flower, then they land onto the stigma of this other flower, then they therefore shall have what we call compatibility. So this incompatibility calls for cross-pollination, to carry them from one flower, from one anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower. My dear learners, so these are the adaptations, these are the things, these are the reasons as why some flowers have cross-pollination. The pistil and the stamen grow on different plants, then the stamen and the pistil mature at different times. Then there is what we call incompatibility of pollen grains, which means the failure of the pollen grains to germinate when they are landed or when they are put on the stigma of the same plant. Therefore, now I think that one has been cleared and is now clear to you. Then let us now come and get the what you call characteristics of these cross-pollinated flowers. How do they behave? Now, because the stamen, the pistil and the stamen grow on different plants, there we have a need for agents of pollination, as we shall see, meaning that they have to have brightly colored petals to attract these agents. One, they have brightly colored petals in order to attract carriers. Number two, they are big, they are large, and they can easily be seen. They are conspicuous, so they are large and can easily be seen in order to receive pollen from another flower. Number three, they are scented, so they produce scent. Number four, they produce little but sticky pollen grain or pollen grains. And now these flowers, the anthers are below the stigma. The anthers are below the stigma. The anthers are below the stigma. Actually, in an exam, they can draw for you this diagram. Then, like this one, this is the ovary. Then we have this, and they put this. Then they ask you, which type of pollination is this flower likely to have? So this flower is likely to have a cross-pollination. Why? Give a reason. The anthers are below the stigma, meaning that and this one needs the agents of what we call pollination, and these agents must be biotic agents, the living agents of pollination, as we are going to do what to discuss. Because now if we don't get those agents, once wind blows this flower, the pollen grains are going to pour here. That's no pollination, so we need a carrier to carry them from here then onto the stigma. So this is a characteristic. Then the adaptation or the ability becomes the stamen and the pistil maturing at different time. Then the characteristic becomes says the anther is below the stigma. Then another characteristic number 6, they produce nectar. So their petals, the nectary glands in their petals produce nectar, which will be now fought by the agents of pollination. Therefore, I hope you've understood clearly the difference between the adaptation and the characteristics of cross-pollinated flowers and what cross-pollination is. Then let us move on and see what we call the agencies of pollination, the things that aid in carrying pollen grains from the anthers to the stigma. Wow! Now, so all these pictures you are seeing, they are showing us the agents of pollination. Now, agents of pollination means the carriers of pollen grains, the things that transmit, the things that carry pollen grains from the anthers to the stigma of a flower. Now here we are having insects. So this one is showing insects, but under insects we have very many insects, and especially these insects must be hairy, so they have to be with hairy bodies such that the pollen grains stick on them, then they carry them to other parts or to other flowers. Then one of the insects here, we are having what we call honeybees, and the honeybee, which is normally seen around flowers, that is a worker bee. Then here we are having another insect. This one is a butterfly. Then apart from a butterfly, we are having also what you call moths. But now these moths, for them, they are known as these insects, these other insect pollinators. For them, they pollinate flowers at night. Now, how are they able to pollinate these flowers at night? So these moths are able to pollinate flowers at night by the help of scent, the good smell produced by flowers. For example, if this flower produces a good smell at night, then these moths are sensitive to that flower to that scent from the flower at night. So it will follow where that scent is coming from until it lands onto that flower. Then apart from the butterflies, moths and work bees, then we are having beetles and also what we call we have beetles and also what we call the lady birds. Then apart from the insects as the pollinators agents, then we have birds. So the birds here, we have two examples. One, we have what we call the hummingbird, and also what we call the sunny bird. Then these hummingbirds or the sunbirds, they are the big class of birds which we discussed in our first term, under a class of perching birds. Then these birds, actually these birds, they are able to fly forward and backwards, so they can fly backwards and forward. Then they are able to pollinate these flowers because they have a long cylinder curved beak. So this is their beak. So the beak is too long and it is slender, it is tiny to fit in small flowers as you are seeing here. So the beak is too small, it is slender and it is curved and it is long to reach at the base of a flower, and it gets what we call nectar. So in so doing, it is now carrying pollen grains from this flower then onto this one, then there like that. So these birds, they pollinate flowers, and examples we have the sunbird and the hummingbird. Then here we are having animals, and under animals we are having this mammal, and this mammal, it is a flying mammal and it is a bat. And the type of bat this is, it is the fruit eating bat. So as it is looking for fruits, so it ends up even looking for juices from flowers, thus it carries out cross-pollination. Then when we look at this one is showing us what we call the dandelion. It has been these ones, they're in air. What has caused them to come here automatically? That is the moving air, which is wind. Therefore wind becomes an agent of pollination. Then we are having this, and this one is called the water lily. This one is water lily, so it is on water, therefore it has flowers. Then these flowers will produce pollen grains. Then the pollen grains are going to be carried by water until it reaches another flower and lands onto its stigma. So water also becomes an agent of of pollination, and this one is an agent of plants that are found on water, like water lily. So in summary, agents of pollination are the carriers of pollen grains. Then we have insects, we have birds, we have mammals, then we have wind and water. I think you've understood that very well. After we have looked at the agents of pollination, then we are now going to get two types of flowers. We are going to get those flowers that are pollinated by wind and the flowers that are pollinated by insects. Now we are now going to look at the characteristics or the things that make these flowers to be pollinated by wind. One, these flowers are not scented. So these flowers are non-scented, so they don't produce a good smell. Then these ones, for them, they are scented, they produce smell, that good smell. For example, we looked at the moth and we said that these moths, for them, they don't look at colors. For them, what they use is the scent from these flowers. So insect-pollinated flowers, some of them must be scented. Now when we come to these ones pollinated by wind, they have dull colored petals. They have dark colored petals, whereas these ones, they have brightly colored petals. Then these ones, they are small and cannot easily be seen. They are small and cannot easily be seen. Then these ones are large enough to be seen easily. So they are large and can easily be seen. They are large and can easily be seen. And then these ones, the anthers are above the stigma. anthers are above the stigma, whereas these ones, the anthers are below the stigma. The anthers are below the stigma. Then we have then another one here. These ones they don't produce nectar. These ones, they don't produce nectar, whereas these ones produce nectar. These ones do not produce nectar. These ones produce nectar. Then these are the characteristics and the differences of wind-pollinated flowers. Let us move on to our last part and see the uses of flowers. So these flowers are very important. These flowers are very important to both plants and animals. Now let us look at to plants one. To plants, these flowers attract the agents of pollination. Attract the agents of pollination. They attract the agents of what? Pollination. And two, the flowers produce fruits and seeds. They produce fruits and seeds, of which seeds help plants to reproduce, and fruits protect the what? The seeds. Now let us look at the uses of flowers to man. These ones are very many. So we use these flowers as gifts, so we can give them to our friends as gifts, especially on maybe during the Valentine, to show love and so on. Number two, we can also use these flowers to show love, as in when we are bearing our loved ones, so we put flowers. So those flowers are called wreaths. So a wreath is that flower put on a casket or a coffin of that dead person. Then number three, these flowers, we use them to make insecticides, the chemicals that kill insects. The best example is pyrethrum. This one is used to make insecticides. Number four, these flowers can be eaten as food. We can eat them as food. For example, the cowrie flowers which you buy from the market. Number five, these flowers are used. These flowers are eaten as food. Yeah, insecticides show love, and we can sell them and get money. So they're sold, and people get money after selling them. So this one marks the end of our lesson number 6. I urge you to do the assignment which is going to be given after this in the activity. So I also recommend you to just go to Revision Uganda to get more videos. What is a flower? What is a flower? Number 2, state the 2 types of pollination. Number 3, name the insect. Name the insect that pollinates flowers at night. Number 4, why do some flowers have cross-pollination? Number 5, which type of pollination do the following flowers have? 1, bean flowers. Roman 2, maize. Number 6, mention 3 agents of pollination. Number 7, write down 2 Characteristics of Roman 1 wind-pollinated flowers. Roman 2 self-pollinated flowers. Self-pollinated flowers. Number 8. What is cross-pollination? What is cross-pollination? Number 9. Name the hardest part. The hardest part of a tooth. Number 10. Why is the pulp cavity called the living part? The living part of a tooth. We meet in the next lesson that will be about seeds.